Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Myra Ansari here for Wave Now. Hope you're having a good Tuesday so far. So we are going live to Greater Louisville, Inc. They are hosting their second installment of the 2024 Capital Connection Series, which is presented by Norton Healthcare. And today their speaker is U.S. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. They're getting ready to bring him up to the podium. So let's listen in.
We'll try to say that 5 times. Which is going to look at studying how Kentucky can attract and retain top talent. And this is something that we worked with Governor Beshear on and legislators since early 2023 to try to figure out how we can spur more investment on the statewide level into talent attraction and retention. We're looking forward to working with the task force this interim and continued movement on this important topic. In addition to attracting talent, this General Assembly also focused on retaining, and re-engaging the workforce that Kentucky already has by addressing chronic barriers to employment. GLI, in partnership with several organizations, helped pass key child care and family leave policies, which will help working families in Kentucky. These are just a few of those big wins. If you haven't seen it already, our legislative outcomes document is available on our website, which gives an overview of all the wins and missed opportunities this session and names our 2024 most valuable policymakers, or MVPs. Now, let's kick off our program and talk more at the federal level. I'd like to invite Dr. Stephen Hester, Senior Vice President, Chief Clinical and Strategy Officer at Norton Healthcare, to say a few words and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Shelby. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Certainly, Norton Healthcare is proud to be the presenting sponsor of Capital Connections. You know, one of the things that, just to follow up a little bit on what Megan's comments were earlier on growth, you know, I do want to talk and say thank you to GLI for all your efforts to continue to improve our community. You know, I do think we've got so much in this community that's going well and so many great opportunities going forward. And so we're proud to be part of that. One of the things, fortunately for us, over the past year, we've had great growth from a Norton Healthcare perspective. We've had 3 facilities we've added in Southern Indiana: Norton Clark, Norton Scott, and Norton King's Daughters. But I'll tell you, we're really excited about our facility we're opening in November, West Louisville Hospital. It's going to be the first hospital in West Louisville in 150 years. Tremendous opportunity and a partnership that we have there working with Goodwill. And really just feel like there's a great opportunity to make impact in this community. You know, one of the things too, it's a true privilege to care for patients, and really just want to share, and so thankful that that we have the opportunity to do that. And we've got a great team of our team here today representing our 23,000 employees, and certainly the care that they provide, and just definitely thank them for their leadership and being here today. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest. Senator Republican leader Mitch McConnell. Leader McConnell became the longest serving Senate party leader in American history. Elected to lead the Republican conference 9 times since 2006. From 2015 to 2021, Leader McConnell served as Senate Majority Leader. Time magazine has thrice named McConnell one of the 100 most influential people in the world, and is Kentucky's longest serving senator, first elected in 1984. Also, please note that Leader McConnell has a biography coming out this fall. I think, you know, I'm sure that it contains a lifetime of great stories. Looking forward to reading that. And so his impact will be long felt in Kentucky. Leader McConnell has always been a friend of Norton Healthcare, and we're certainly grateful for his leadership and thankful for his friendship. Please join me in welcoming Leader McConnell.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. You mentioned how long I've been around. You probably don't know what my first real break in politics was. My internship with Henry Clay. You know, having been in the leader job as long as I have, I'm frequently asked, what's it like to be the leader of your party in the Senate? I struggled with it for a couple of years, but then I finally came up with the perfect answer, I thought. It's a little bit like being the groundskeeper at a cemetery. Everybody's onto you, but no one is listening. I've been the majority leader and I've been the minority leader. I can tell you majority's better because the majority leader gets to set the agenda to basically decide what you're going to debate. Doesn't guarantee the outcome, but frequently what the majority leader does, it's important, is what he doesn't do. And I think anybody looking back at my career would probably conclude the decision not to fill the Supreme Court vacancy in 2016 during the presidential election was probably the biggest decision I ever made. And so it's important, however, no matter who's in charge, whether one party has the presidency of the House and the Senate, or we have divided government. We have divided government more often than not since World War II. And I think what you conclude from that is that the American people are not in love with either side, and so they divide the government. And I think that's not a decision to do nothing, but a decision to look for things you can agree on and do those. My biggest critics these days are that occasionally I've done deals with the other side. And since there was a lot of discussion about the transportation bill, I think I'll start with that. We had a Democratic president, Democratic House, Democratic Senate. The president was asking for a massive amount of money, far beyond what most of us thought made any sense. And Bill Clinton's Secretary of the Treasury, Lawrence Summers, who some of you old timers may remember, said at the time, if you do this, you're going to have 40-year inflation. They did, and we do. But part of what they were asking for was something that I thought was important for the country and particularly important for Kentucky. And so on a bipartisan basis, we kind of carved out the transportation part of that and moved it separately. And I had watched both the Obama administration and the Trump administration not be able to get anywhere on transportation. You would think it'd be easy. Nothing is easy. Anyway, on a bipartisan basis, we pulled the transportation part out of this massive request, and it was fully paid for. And to bring it home, what it meant for Kentucky, and by the way, I ended up being the only member of my party in Kentucky that voted for it. It meant building the Brent Spence Bridge in northern Kentucky, regretfully for people here, without tolls, and about $5 billion in additional transportation funding for state government for all kinds of projects all across the state. So that's by example of when you need to do things together. Now, having said that, I don't have a lot of enthusiasm for this administration, as you can imagine. And I'll begin with the $2.6 trillion that was dumped on the economy. It's easy to start inflation and really hard to turn it off. The only way I think you can turn it off is for the Fed to raise interest rates, which creates yet another set of problems, and squeezes out the opportunity to do as many things as you would otherwise do if you had a sort of normal 2% annual inflation rate. So even though what I told people around the state, I said, I didn't vote for it, but take the money and good luck. And they are spending it, and it's costing them a lot more to get there. But in that particular instance, I thought it made sense. For the rest of it, it dumped an enormous amount of money and created the kind of inflation that we're talking about. I know Joe Biden pretty well. He's a good guy. I like him personally. I never thought he was a moderate in the Senate, but he ran as a moderate, as you recall. Now, if you think about his situation, it makes sense. He was running against Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. I suppose he looked moderate compared to those two. But as soon as the president got elected, he pretty much signed up with the far left of the Democratic Party, which has created another set of problems for all of you who are in business and hoping to make money. This has been a regulatory nightmare by this administration. All of these unelected people having an impact on the cost of doing business. But you bring in the Supreme Court, and I had a lot to do with that. Not only 3 new Supreme Court justices, but 54 new circuit judges. Men and women whose basic interest was not the famous case that everybody is aware of, but trying to rearrange the arrangement between Congress and the bureaucracy. Their basic approach is if people who were elected weren't for it, we question your ability to do it. And the famous case was EPA versus West Virginia. The EPA decided to regulate carbon. Not here to argue about whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but they lost in the Supreme Court 6-3 because the Congress didn't give them the authority to regulate carbon. And there have been a whole series of cases around the country where the men and women that we put on the court are trying to go after what's called the administrative state. In other words, no matter which administration controls the government, the view that you can push the limits without the authority from people who are actually elected is under review all across the country. Of course, litigation's not cheap and not quick, but it's an opportunity to get some pushback, if you will, against Congress, which has had a tendency over the years to not do its work, to basically assign to the executive branch, do it however you want to do it. Well, I think that's going to fundamentally change the country, I believe, in a positive way, not benefiting either side in any particular way, but I think we get people who are actually elected back to doing their job. The second big unforced error of the Biden administration, and the reason the president's in such a difficult place politically, was the southern border problem. It was clearly a change in direction beginning the day the president took office, and you've watched the outcome. If Joe Biden is defeated this fall, I think the principal reason that will occur is 2 unforced errors. One, the $2.6 trillion creating the inflation, and the other, basically opening the border. Those are his 2 biggest problems. The first debate's going to be Thursday night. I think it'll be interesting to see. The other problem the president has, something I'm familiar with, is how old he is. And all of a sudden, that's become something of an issue. As you can imagine, it's not my favorite issue. But the 2 candidates are almost the same age. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they play off each other. President Trump is very confident, having rallies around the country this week. President Biden holding up at Camp David, studying and working with others. And we'll see the results Thursday night. And I think that's going to be fascinating to watch, particularly if you're in my line of work. You may want to go to sleep early. But so where do we go from here? I think biggest problem we have is something you probably don't spend much time thinking about. We're in the most dangerous international situation we've been in since right before World War II. My party has a tendency to be isolationist when there's a Democrat in the White House. In the 30s, leading up to World War II, most Republicans, including the most prominent Republican of that era, was Robert Taft, whose father had been president and Chief Justice. Taft and most Senate Republicans voted against Lend-Lease, which was Roosevelt's way of trying to help get some help to the British, who were getting clobbered by 1940. Well, Pearl Harbor took care of that. And all of a sudden, everybody was on the same team. But then after the war was over, Taft and most Senate Republicans opposed NATO and opposed the Marshall Plan, both of which were extraordinarily important. From my point of view, I'm glad that Eisenhower got the nomination in 52 because he had a totally different view, closer to Truman, that America had an important role to play in the world. And the NATO agreement was, by any objective standard, the most significant and successful treaty in the history of the world. It not only prevented any additional conflicts between the Russians and the rest of Europe, it also basically won the Cold War. And if anybody made the biggest decision that ended the Cold War, it was Ronald Reagan. And Reagan said, the best way to approach this problem is peace through strength. In other words, they don't mess with you if they're afraid of the consequences. So what's happened lately is we've learned that the Russians are pretty much like they used to be, even though there was a period of time after the Berlin Wall came down when we thought maybe Russia was going to be a normal country. Well, that didn't last. And we've seen now, even though Ukraine is not a part of NATO, this bloody initiated contest by Vladimir Putin, who's pretty much just the way the old Russians used to be when it was the Soviet Union. What has happened as a result of it so far? Some good things. 2 new countries have joined NATO, Finland and Sweden. Previous president was always complaining because NATO members were not spending 2% of their GDP on defense. That's gone from just 3 countries to 23 countries during this. So NATO is stronger. It also has influence worldwide. I've got some colleagues who say, well, what does this have to do with China and the Far East? I'll just quote Prime Minister of Japan, who said, if you want to send Xi a message, beat Putin in Ukraine. Our allies in Indo-Pacific are totally behind the effort to defeat Putin. So this has worldwide implications. So again, compared to World War II, we obviously had two really big competitors. We have two really big competitors now, China, Russia. What we have that they didn't have then was Iran and terrorism and proxies. And so you add it all up, and I think you could make a pretty strong, conclusive argument that this is a more dangerous period than before World War II. So it leads to the question, what do you do about it? The Biden administration, for 4 years in a row, in its budget requests of Congress, has not raised defense enough to even keep up with inflation. That won't get the job done. The only way to deal with the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and the rest is to be strong. That's the greatest deterrent, is to be strong. That's what we learned from Ronald Reagan. It was true then, it'll be true now. So my big complaint here with the administration is the underfunding of the opportunity for us to be strong. To give you an idea of how much cheaper it is to be strong than to not be strong, let's go back to World War II. At the beginning of World War II, the percentage of defense spent on, of the GDP on defense was 5%, which today would be a good number. It wasn't very impressive then. At the height of the war in World War II, we were spending 37% of our GDP on defense, and millions of people were getting killed. So believe me, my friends, it's better to be prepared in a hefty way in order to prevent much more devastating consequences, both in terms of financial costs and loss of lives. So America is the indispensable player here. Every time I go abroad, and over the years, as you can imagine, I've been most places, what America thinks and what America does is on everybody's mind. And we need to make sure, no matter who wins the White House, that our allies abroad know that America is strong. That doesn't mean you have to be engaged in every single conflict. But in order to reassure allies, you need to provide them assistance if they get into trouble, which we're doing with the Israelis and we're doing with the Ukrainians. And with regard to everybody else, this may surprise you, the people that I run into who are the strongest supporters of foreign assistance are the military, because they know how much tougher warfare is than providing some assistance to your friends who are not in a conflict. So the next time somebody says to you, why don't we just get rid of foreign aid? It's about 1% of the budget. It buys an awful lot of goodwill among people who want to be allied with us. Secondly, on that point, I think we have a tendency to expect our allies to run their countries like we do. We always think just a good election will take care of everything. Well, for those of you who are not Middle Eastern junkies, I would remind you, we had an election in Gaza. Hamas won. We had a legitimate election in Egypt, and the Brotherhood won. So my view is, you figure out your domestic politics, but in terms of international affairs, are you on our side or theirs? Because some of these societies are simply not going to structure their internal governing authority in the way that we would prefer. So the more short-term effect is which side are you on? And the final point I would make, coming back to this country, I have during my career always made it a priority to try to have a big impact on Kentucky. The two parties are very different these days. For example, both the Democratic leader of the Senate and the Democratic leader of the House live in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn. Last year, I was the only one of the four leaders who wasn't from New York or California. The Democrats have become a very sort of coastal, far left party. And we've had similar struggles on our side. But my view was, my first responsibility was to do as much as I could for this state, what the elite would call flyover country. Well, all across flyover country, they've shifted totally to the Republicans. And in the heavily populated states, they've shifted almost entirely to the Democrats. And that's why we're going to have a really close presidential election. Either way it goes, it's likely to be pretty close. But seeing Kim here, I just want to say that I've always considered the best thing I could do for our state is to try to help our universities be as successful as possible. And one of the things that I set up 30 years ago was the McConnell Scholars Program at U of L. We've now got 260 graduates. These are top flight students. We have two of them at Harvard Law School right now. And the hope was if they had a really first class education in the state, they'd be more likely to stay here as opposed to going off to college in the East and never coming back. So I think it's working. About 60% of the graduates came back to Kentucky or never left it in the first place. And that's what I have felt was the best thing I could do at my level to try to help Kentucky compete with other states and to keep our best brains at home. Finally, thank you so much for the opportunities I've had to represent the greatest state in America for a very, very long time. I never dreamed I'd get to the Senate in the first place. Even my mother didn't think I was going to make it. And never occurred to me that I might end up spending 7 terms. And it certainly never occurred to me when I got elected to the Senate. Let me tell you, everything's not done by seniority, but some things are, including the location of your desk on the Senate floor. When I got there, I was in the very last desk over in the corner. If you watch C-SPAN 2, we usually are not sitting where we're supposed to, but every once in a while, the presiding officer said, okay, sit where you're supposed to. Well, the first time that happened to me, I was sitting over in the corner where the light's not very good. I looked around the room and I thought to myself, none of these people are ever going to die, retire, or be defeated. I did notice that Bob Dole had the best seat. And I thought, well, that's a long way from the last seat. But maybe if I work really hard, people at home send me back a few times, maybe I could get the best seat. And when I got the best seat, it never occurred to me that I would end up in the best seat longer than Mike Mansfield. So none of this would have been possible without the support of Kentucky. And for that, I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leader McConnell. As I said, we really appreciate you've always been so open. You've taken every request that we've ever given to come speak, and we really appreciate that. We are at the end of our time, and Leader McConnell is gracious enough to stay a few extra minutes to take photographs with anyone that's interested. So we're going to have that set up over here by the GLI screen. If you could please form a single file line, that would be great. And we'll get to as many photos as possible before he has to take off. But again, thank you to our sponsors for today's event. Join us for our DC fly-in if you're able to. And thanks for being here today so much. Thank you. Good to see you. You want to go head over there?
Elevator.